Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfic. This will be the continuation of Little Acts of Kindness. This will be part 30, chapter 30. Just a note, please refer to any of the trigger warnings because they do come into play again in this chapter. And this chapter is a little bit ominous. It's more on the mystery side of things, and it does take on an alternative POV, so just keep that in mind. Chapter 30. A Midsummer Night's Dream. Looking into the mirror, plain brown eyes met her. Reaching up towards her hair, she pulled it into a ponytail, the blonde strands cascading through her fingers as she moved it into a bun. Glancing down at the driver's license, she nodded to herself, satisfied that she resembled the photo. Her name was Reddy Iropoy. She would have to remember that. Would have to make sure she didn't slip up. If she did, her life would be over, even worse than before. Failure would likely lead to her insanity. Iropoy sighed as she clipped the last strand into place. Nothing would go wrong. She had planned too much for this, ever since she had heard that he had gotten out. Brown eyes narrowed. She was going to make him suffer for the 13 years of suffering he had inflicted on her, the thing she was forced to do because of him. Iropoy would get her revenge, and damn the costs. She knew exactly what was at stake if any heroes or the police caught her, yet she also knew how they worked, and she was going to use that knowledge against them, just this once. She was going to kill that man. And she knew she wouldn't regret it, even if killing him didn't release her from this curse. He already had 13 years to release her, and he chose to have a longer sentence in jail than to free her and the other victims. He was supposed to have 15 years, but they released him early for his good behavior. As if he was actually repentant. If he was, he would release her and the others from his quirk, would make them stop craving things. Even now, she could feel the onset of the clawing, a slight itch. It was still safe to ignore it, but in another week she would once more be forced to relieve it. Pocketing the wallet, she turned and left the hotel room she had rented for the night. Now, it was time to find her quarry. Iropoy had tracked him to Kyoto, but she didn't know his exact location. Leaving the room, she had pulled out the phone she was currently using. The last sighting of him was at an old warehouse. Pulling up the directions, she started walking in that direction, flats clicking softly on the ground. Out on the street, she smiled emptily at the people she passed by, wanting to be seen as nothing more than the airhead secretary she was posing as. It was a Saturday, the streets filled with busy people going about their business. As she left the main streets, the crowds thinned out, and after an hour of walking, she came to the warehouse. Sneaking into the building, she looked around. It was filled with crates, boxes of unknown content. Eyes scanning around, a glint in the gloomy lighting caught her eyes. Heading towards it, she crouched down, gloved hands picking up the needle. It was empty, but still held drops of liquid on the inside. It was fresh. He must have come here to do one of his drug deals. Carefully, she put the needle back down. Heading towards one of the crates, she checked the lid. Finding it to be on tightly, she went to another and another. After checking about 5, she found a loose one, and she shifted the lid to the side, looking inside of the crate. Inside were just normal goods, nothing illegal. She slid the lid back on. There was nothing useful to where he might be. Iropoy huffed. "Too bad you couldn't make this easy for me," she whispered out, taking one last look at the warehouse before leaving. She would have to find one of his victims then. He always made sure they would be able to come find him to get their fix, and so long as they paid, he would give them whatever he hooked them on. Iropoy was glad that he was arrested before the first craving had taken hold of her, before he forced her to beg for him. If he hadn't been arrested, she might not have even realized that any guy would suffice, not just him. Despite that silver lining, she would always regret how she found out, how the clawing had taken over as she resisted it. Iropoy thought she could resist it, but it got worse and worse until everything was a blurry haze and she had attacked her mentor. Once her mind had cleared up, she had been upset, apologizing profusely. She was lucky that her mentor understood. To this day, he was the only one who knew the full range of what happened. Not even her best friends knew what happened. She couldn't tell them. Didn't want to see the pity in their eyes. Exiting the warehouse, she started walking around, sticking to the outskirts of the city as she observed the alleyways, looking for someone exhibiting the signs she herself was familiar with. After all these years, she knew how to hide the signs, but if he was starting up again, there would be fresh victims. Victims who didn't know how to control themselves, didn't know how they could resist before snapping. Brown eyes scanned the people she passed by, observing how each of them walked, talked, Acted. 1 hour passed. 2. Still no luck. Stomach rumbling, she sighed, pulling out her phone and finding a nearby cafe where she could get lunch. Ordering a sandwich and taking off her gloves, she sat down. Eating carefully, she made sure a vapid look remained on her face, ignoring her silver nails as the sunlight filtering through the window glinted off of them. Just as she was finishing her lunch, a man came through the door, shifting foot to foot, biting his nails. Green eyes flickering back and forth, a desperation in them. The man ordered and ate his food, only taking a couple bites before pushing it away. Iroquois inwardly smiled. It would seem she found a potential victim. Either he was a victim or he was a normal druggie. Only further observation would help her. Pulling on her gloves, she checked that her nails slotted through the holes. Seamlessly, her nails blended into the gloves, unnoticeable at a distance as anything other than a part of her gloves. Seeing the guy check his phone, she wondered if he would be meeting with her tormentor soon. She hoped so, if only so she could put an end to him. She sat, pretending to be relaxing, waiting for the man to leave. After a long 10 minutes, the man got up, throwing away his uneaten food and quickly walking out. At a much more relaxed pace, she also left. Stepping outside, brown eyes saw him as he turned a corner, heading in the direction of the warehouse. Quickly, she followed after him, flats tapping against the ground. He walked past the warehouse, going behind it. Shifting her posture, she turned down the side of the building, footsteps now silent. Halfway down the side of the building, she could hear voices coming from around the corner. "Do you have the money?" the voice that haunted her nightmares asked. Yes, please." A cruel laugh. "Money first." Even after all these years, she recognized the voice of Katsubo, Yami, Quirk, Craving. The guy who cursed her to crave sex, forced her to seek out someone to keep her companionship. The guy who had taken her virginity, had raped her. She could hear the victim fumbling through his pockets, grabbing his money. Iroquois took this time to pull out a vial from her clutch. Carefully, she opened it and dipped each of the metal nails into the vial. Tapping her nails of the excess liquid, she capped the bottle and put it back in. "Thank you for your business. As agreed, here's your supply." Iroquois stepped around the corner. "I've been waiting a long time for this meeting, Katsubo." Before her stood the jittery man. He was holding a small case filled with whatever drug Katsubo had hooked him on. The man looked between the two of them, quickly fleeing away, obviously sensing the dangerous situation. Katsubo tilted his head, long, curly brown hair cascading to the side. Confusion entered his eyes. "Do I know you?" Yes. Not that she expected him to recognize her. She was disguised for a reason, after all. 13 years I've suffered because of you, and today it all ends. Tell me, will your quirk stop with your death?" She gave him no time to answer. She lunged at him, hands outstretched. All she needed was one good scratch. Katsubo's pale gray eyes widened as he stumbled back, tripping and falling. The guy managed to roll to the side, avoiding her kick, and getting back up, looming over her, trying to use his height to intimidate her. "You bitch," he spat. Katsubo sneered at her. 13 years ago, huh? I know who you are." She smiled ferally. "Good." She swiped at him again, catching the arm he used to block her. Ripping his shirt and flesh easily, he yelped, staring at her with wide eyes as she flicked the gathered blood off of the metal nails. "You were a hero trainee. Don't heroes avoid killing people? Shouldn't you just be trying to arrest me?" the guy shouted, panic entering his eyes. "I'm no hero. You saw to that," she snarled. He was wide open now, clutching at his arm that was probably burning in pain. Swiping with her right hand, she grabbed his arm, spinning him as she twisted the arm behind his back. With her still poised left hand, she reached around the guy, placing the nails at his throat, digging into the skin but not piercing it yet. "Even should killing you not free me of your quirk, I will be satisfied knowing you can no longer harm any more people." Applying more pressure, she dug the nails into his throat, and with a yank, she raked the nails through his throat. Dropping him, he landed on the ground with a thud. She watched as he clutched at his throat, trying to stop the blood. It wouldn't matter. The poison would finish him off if he didn't suffocate. Looking down at him, she noticed a scar, raking across his lip. She didn't remember the scar being there 13 years ago, but she did remember fighting against him, trying desperately to free herself from his grip. 13 years ago, she had managed to bite his lip when he kissed her, ripping away a piece of his flesh. It hadn't stopped him, but she was glad to see that even back then, she had gotten some form of revenge. It didn't make her feel better, not really. It was a hollow sort of victory, short-lived before he ripped her clothes off. Before... Iroboy closed her brown eyes, shaking her head gently to shove the memories away. Whatever happened now, if they caught her or not, it didn't matter. The deed would soon be done. Opening her eyes, she watched, staring into his eyes as his labored breathing came to a slow halt. His grip around his neck loosened, and she saw the light leaving his eyes. Turning away, she walked back down the alleyway. Already she could feel the clawing sensation falling away. There was no urge to have sex anymore, no presence driving her to act like a whore. She was free. Blissfully free. For the first time in 13 years, she smiled, a true, joyful smile. Whatever happened because of her actions today, she would never regret them. Not now. Not ever. She was free, and his other victims would also be free of his quirk, able to live their lives normally again. No longer would she be forced to degrade herself. Now she could act however she wanted, without that clawing urging her to have sex. Flats tapping against the ground, she made her way to the train station. It was time to go back home, though first she was going to find some place to unwind. Entering the restroom of the train station, she removed the gloves, throwing them in the trash. Then carefully she unclipped the metal nails, washing them before adding them to the trash. Grabbing her clutch, she pulled out the poison, dumping it down the sink, and after the cleaning of the bottle, added it with the other items in the trash. Hands moving, she popped out the color contacts and undid the bun, changing it instead to a low ponytail. She would have to remove the dye once she got home, but that would be easy. With deft movements, she removed the top layer of her clothes, glad no one noticed the specks of blood. Underneath, she wore another outfit, a jogger's outfit. Looking into the mirror, she smiled and pulled out the phone and a pair of earbuds. No longer did Ready Iroboy exist. Now, she was just an everyday jogger. Just a little longer, and she would be home, and she could return to her normal persona. A persona she would slowly be able to change, to make what she wanted it to be, instead of what she had been forced to be because of Katsubo. Leaving the restroom, she went on to the train, earbuds in ears, though no music played. Today was the beginning of something new. Something great. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 30 of Little Acts of Kindness. If you remember from back in Chapter 10, at the end of that chapter, there was a mystery component. You didn't know whose perspective it was, and it was a little bit ominous. You were unsure of who the characterization was. Still, the mystery component is at play. We're getting more details on that, but it does cycle in and continue to be a presence throughout the fic. So just keeping that in mind. So every once in a while, you'll see these types of POVs, but I just wanted to kind of reaffirm that, yes, you're listening to the right story. That's why I kind of made a note about it at the beginning of this one, because I knew it would have thrown a few people, especially if the entire chapter is in a different POV that you weren't expecting. Let me know your thoughts and reactions, though. I am eager to hear what everyone thought. And Chapter 31 will be up next. As always, thank you so much for listening.